They told us the drop camp on Silos 9 would break him in a day. The gravity was crushing, the air bled the lungs, and the rations were literally toxic to 90% of the galaxy. Humans will never survive Deathworld training, the Commandant sneered. Then, the human did the unthinkable. He didn't just survive. He sat down at the mess hall, looked at a plate of Class 4 biohazard, and asked for hot sauce. "Stick around, because this gets messy." The ramp of the dropship slammed into the rusted landing pad, kicking up a cloud of iron-rich dust that tasted like old blood. Cole stepped out. His knees immediately buckled. He didn't fall, but he caught himself with a heavy grunt, his boots grinding into the grating. Silos 9 boasted a gravitational pull 1.4 times standard. To the towering, multi-limbed recruits pushing past him, it was a brisk autumn morning. To Cole, it felt like someone had strapped a cinder block to his chest. "Move, soft skin." A shoulder the size of a boulder clipped him. Cole stumbled, his teeth rattling. The creature that hit him didn't even look back. It was a saurian, a walking tank of dark green scales and muscle, built for planets where the weather tried to kill you and the wildlife finished the job. Cole didn't say a word. He just spat a glob of dust from his mouth, adjusted the straps of his standard-issue rucksack, and kept walking. At the end of the pad stood the Commandant. The alien was a towering, chitin-plated nightmare, resembling a praying mantis bred with a grizzly bear. He paced the line of new recruits, his mandibles clicking in a rhythmic, dismissive cadence. His gaze swept over the saurians, the heavily armored Krell, and the four-armed Ursoids. Then, his compound eyes locked onto Cole. The Commandant stopped. He leaned in, the smell of sulfur and ozone radiating from his mandibles. "A human," the Commandant rasped, his translator box struggling to convey the sheer contempt in his voice. The bureaucrats at Central Command must have a twisted sense of humor, or they simply ran out of body bags. Cole looked up. The alien's breath was hot, acidic. Cole's own breath was coming short, his lungs working overtime to filter the thin, ammonia-laced atmosphere. "I'm here for the certification, sir," Cole said, his voice flat. The Commandant let out a sound like grinding metal. A laugh. "You are here to die. Humans are Class 3 worlders. You require temperature-controlled habitats. You require purified water. You require soft beds. Silos 9 is a Class 9 death world. Our training is designed to break apex predators. You are prey." Cole didn't flinch. "Show me my bunk, sir." The Commandant stared at him for a long, quiet moment. Then he turned. "Mess hall. First meal. Let us see if your stomach is as stubborn as your mouth." The mess hall wasn't a room. It was a cavernous dome of reinforced steel, smelling strongly of rot and fermentation. Deathworlders didn't eat processed nutrient paste. They ate raw, aggressive flora and fauna, designed to fortify their immune systems against localized venom and radiation. Cole took his tray and stood in line. The slop jockey, a multi-tentacled drone, slapped a slab of meat onto his metal plate. It was deep purple, slightly translucent, and twitching. Beside it was a scoop of a gray, fibrous root that smelled unmistakably like industrial bleach. Cole carried his tray to a long metal table. The other recruits were already eating, tearing into their food with massive jaws and serrated teeth. They paused to watch him. The saurian who had bumped him earlier nudged his neighbor. A low, rumbling chuckle rippled down the bench. They were waiting for him to vomit. They were waiting for him to quit. The purple meat was a cut from a bog strider. It contained trace amounts of a paralytic neurotoxin. For a saurian, it was a mild stimulant. For a human, it was supposed to be a one-way ticket to cardiac arrest. Cole stared at the meat. It twitched again, He unzipped the small cargo pocket on his left thigh. From it, he pulled a small, battered metal flask and a shaker of red powder. He unscrewed the flask. He poured a generous amount of clear, pungent liquid over the twitching meat. It was distilled grain alcohol, moonshine specifically, a parting gift from his uncle in Kentucky. The high alcohol content immediately began to denature the alien proteins. The twitching stopped. Next, he unscrewed the shaker. He coated the slab in a thick, even layer of cayenne pepper, smoked paprika, and coarse salt. The commandant stood near the entrance, his datapad in hand, waiting for the human's biometrics to flatline. Cole picked up a serrated knife. He sawed off a piece of the purple meat, stabbed it with his fork, and put it in his mouth. Silence fell over the table. Cole chewed. The meat was tough, like undercooked leather, but the alcohol had neutralized the neurotoxin, turning it into a mild, tingly sensation on his tongue. The cayenne burned, masking the taste of ammonia. He swallowed hard. He didn't die. He didn't gasp. He just cut another piece. "Needs garlic," Cole muttered to himself. He moved on to the fibrous root. He took a bite. It was intensely bitter, highly alkaline. His stomach did a slow, uneasy roll. Cole reached into his pocket again and pulled out a small plastic packet he'd saved from a transport ship's ration kit. Citric acid. Lemon juice. He squeezed it over the root. The acid neutralized the alkaline base in a violent, fizzing chemical reaction. He ate that too. The saurian's jaw hung open, a piece of raw gristle falling from his mouth onto the table. The commandant checked his datapad. He smacked it against his palm, thinking it was malfunctioning. The human's heart rate was elevated, yes, but his digestion was stable. He wasn't dying. He was eating. Cole finished his plate, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and looked up at the saurian, staring at him. "You gonna eat your root?" Cole asked. The saurian slowly slid his tray away. Cole nodded in thanks, pulled the lemon packet back out, and got to work. The alarm blared at 0400 hours. It sounded less like a siren and more like a dying animal screaming into a microphone. Cole rolled out of his cot. His muscles screamed back. The heavy gravity was doing a number on his spine, compressing his vertebrae. He popped his neck, grabbed his boots, and laced them tight. Outside, the red sun of Xylos 9 was just beginning to crest the jagged, obsidian horizon. The air was freezing, biting through Cole's fatigue jacket. "Standard formation!" The commandant barked over the howling wind. "Today we walk. The perimeter of Sector 4. 50 miles. Full gear. If you fall behind, the scavengers will eat you. If you call for extraction, you fail. Move. 50 miles, in 1.4 G, with 80 pounds of gear." The saurians took off at a brutal, thundering sprint. The ursoids dropped to all fours, their massive limbs eating up the distance in ground-shaking bounds. Within minutes, they were dust clouds on the horizon. Cole didn't run. He couldn't. His heart would explode within the first 2 miles. Instead, he settled into a rhythm. Left foot, right foot. Breathe in for 2 counts, out for 2 counts. The ancient, evolutionary heritage of his species waking up in his blood. Humans weren't built for burst speed. They weren't built to out-muscle a predator. They were built to out-stubborn them. Pursuit, predation. The art of walking something to death. By mile 10, the cold morning air vanished, replaced by a scorching, dry heat. The temperature swung wildly on Xylos 9, climbing past 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Cole started to sweat. He unbuttoned his collar, letting the dry wind evaporate the moisture on his skin. It was a biological miracle, really. a built-in thermal regulation system that most species lacked. By mile 20, he saw the first dropout. An ursoid was collapsed by the side of the trail, panting raggedly. Its thick fur, designed for the freezing nights, was trapping the midday heat, slowly boiling its internal organs. A medical drone hovered above it, preparing for extraction. Cole walked past, his pace unchanged. Left, right, left, right. By mile 30, the terrain shifted from flat dust to jagged volcanic rock. Every step required balance, micro-adjustments in the ankles and knees. The saurians, with their rigid, heavily armored legs, were struggling. They were built for flat, explosive charges, not for navigating an endless field of broken glass. Cole found a saurian, leaning heavily against a boulder. Its scales flushed a dangerous, bright orange. Heat exhaustion. The creature's lungs were heaving, trying to expel the heat through rapid, shallow breaths. It couldn't sweat. It couldn't cool down. Cole stopped. He reached for his canteen. "Keep moving, soft skin," the saurian hissed, pride keeping it upright. Cole unscrewed the cap. He didn't offer a drink. Instead, he splashed a handful of water directly onto the back of the saurian's neck, right where the massive artery ran to its brain. The saurian roared in shock, but then froze. The rapid evaporation of the water provided an instant, shocking wave of relief. The bright orange hue of its scales dimmed slightly. "Don't stop moving," Cole said, his voice raspy, parched. "Lactic acid will pool in your joints. Walk it off." Cole didn't wait for a response. He just kept walking. Back in the command center, the commandant was staring at the telemetry screens. His mandibles were perfectly still. "Sir," the commems officer, a slender avian species, chirped nervously. "Recruit Cole's biologicals are erratic. He is hemorrhaging water through his skin. Millions of micropores are leaking fluid. He is destroying himself." "No," the commandant murmured, leaning closer to the screen. "Look at his core temperature," the officer blinked. "It's perfectly stable, but that's impossible. He's been exerting himself in terminal heat for 6 hours." "He's venting it," the commandant said, a sudden, creeping realization dawning on him. "He's using liquid phase change to regulate his thermal load. It's primitive, it's disgusting, but he's not stopping, sir." Mile 40. Cole's legs felt like they were made of lead. His shoulders were bleeding where the straps of his pack had rubbed the skin raw. His lips were cracked, but his mind was terrifyingly clear. The pain was just a signal, and humans had mastered the art of ignoring signals a long time ago. He passed 3 more saurians, 2 Krell. He didn't run, he just didn't stop. When Cole crossed the perimeter gate back into the compound, the sun was setting, plunging the world back into a bitter chill. He was covered in red dust, dried white salt from his sweat, and blood. He walked past the commandant, unclipped his rucksack, and let it hit the dirt with a heavy thud. Cole looked at the alien instructor. His eyes were hollow, rimmed with red, but burning with a quiet, terrifying defiance. "Where's the mess hall?" Cole asked. "I'm starved." Week 3 was the breaking point. The wilderness drop. They were stripped of their rations, loaded into a transport, and dumped into the whispering jungle, a biome located on the planet's equator. The objective was simple. Survive for 7 days. Find your own food. Find your own water. Don't die. The jungle was a nightmare of aggressive flora. The trees didn't just grow, they hunted. Vines snapped like tripwires, and the air was thick with hallucinogenic spores. Cole had grouped up with 3 others. The saurian he had poured water on, who grudgingly introduced himself as Gar, an ursoid named Vaughn, and a nimble, four-eyed tracker named Kale. By day 2, they were starving. The animals were too fast, and the weapons they had been given, crude survival blades, were useless against armor-plated prey. That left foraging. This one, Kyle clicked, holding up a cluster of vibrant, neon-blue pods. My scanners indicate high caloric density. Mild toxins, but our livers can process it. Gar, the saurian, snatched a pod and tossed it into his massive jaws. He chewed twice and swallowed. 10 seconds later, Gar hit the ground. His massive body convulsed, thick foam bubbling past his serrated teeth. His eyes rolled back into his head. "Anaphylaxis!" Kyle shrieked, backing away. "The scanner didn't pick up the neurobinder. He's dying!" Cole dropped to his knees. He didn't have a medkit. He didn't have adrenaline. He grabbed Gar's jaw, forcing it open, checking for airway obstruction. The saurian's throat was swelling shut. "Hold him down!" Cole yelled. Vaughn, the Ursoid, pinned Gar's thrashing limbs. Cole drew his survival knife. It was a filthy, desperate move. But he had no choice. He found the soft cartilage just below the saurian's armored throat plate. He made a small, precise incision, driving a hollow piece of reed he'd snapped from a nearby bush directly into the trachea. Gar gasped. A horrific, whistling sound, but air flowed into his lungs. The convulsing slowed. "He needs calories to fight off the residual toxin," Kyle said, trembling. "But everything here is poison. We are dead. We are all dead." Cole stood up, wiping saurian blood on his trousers. He looked around the dense, alien undergrowth. His eyes landed on a patch of low-lying shrubs. Hanging from the thorny branches were small, bright red fruits, shaped vaguely like bells. Cole walked over and picked one. He snapped it in half. A pungent, acrid smell immediately hit the air. Kyle hissed and backed away. "Don't touch that," Kyle warned. "That is the blister fruit. It's packed with a defensive alkaloid. It causes severe cellular degradation and pain receptors to overload. It will burn a hole in your stomach." Cole held the broken fruit to his nose. He took a deep sniff. His eyes watered instantly, and he sneezed. He rubbed his thumb against the inner membrane, then touched his thumb to his tongue. Fire. Instant, searing heat. Cole grinned. "Capsaicin." "What?" Vaughn rumbled. "Or something close enough to it," Cole said. He started stripping the bush, filling his pockets with the blister fruit. "It's a chemical defense mechanism to stop mammals, or whatever passes for them here, from eating the seeds. But birds can't taste it." "You are not a bird," Kyle pointed out, horrified. "No," Cole said. "I'm a human. We kind of have a thing for poison." Later that evening, they managed to kill a small, six-legged scavenger that wandered too close to their camp. The meat was stringy, smelling heavily of copper and sulfur. Cole built a fire. He sliced the meat thin. Then he took his combat knife and minced the blister fruit into a fine paste. He rubbed it aggressively into the meat. The heat from the fire hit the oiled, capsaicin-laced meat, sending up a plume of spicy, choking smoke. Up in orbit, the Commandant was watching the drone feed. "What is he doing?" the Commandant demanded. "He is aerosolizing a Class 2 chemical irritant. He's gassing his own squad." On the ground, Vaughn and Kyle had retreated to the edge of the clearing, their eyes weeping profusely, coughing as the spicy smoke drifted their way. Even Gar, recovering slowly, was wheezing. Cole sat right next to the fire. Tears were streaming down his dirt-caked face. His nose was running, but he kept rotating the spit. When it was done, he pulled a piece of the sizzling, heavily spiced meat off the skewer. "Cole, stop," Vaughn rumbled, genuine concern in his deep voice. "That is a lethal dose of irritant. You will hemorrhage." Cole blew on the meat, looked at the Ursoid, and took a massive bite. The crunch was loud. The silence that followed was deafening. Cole chewed. His face turned a deep, flushed red. Sweat broke out across his forehead in a sudden wave. He closed his eyes, and a sharp intake of breath hissed through his teeth. "Water," Kyle whispered. "Get him water." Cole swallowed. He opened his eyes, wiping a tear from his cheek with a dirty knuckle. He cleared his throat. "God damn," Cole rasped, a smile breaking through the grimace. "That clears the sinuses." He took another bite. The aliens watched, paralyzed with a mixture of terror and awe, as the human systematically devoured a meal designed by nature to inflict maximum suffering, weeping the entire time, and seemingly enjoying every second of it. "You're broken," Gar croaked from the ground. "Your species is fundamentally broken." Cole tore off a piece of the meat, less heavily spiced, and tossed it to the saurian. "Eat up, Gar. It builds character." In the command center, the commandant slowly lowered his datapad. He watched the human wipe his mouth, take a drink from his canteen, and reach for a third piece of the poisoned meat. For the first time in his long, brutal career, the commandant felt a cold chill run down his exoskeleton. You could break a soldier with pain, you could break them with exhaustion. But how do you break a creature that eats pain for flavor? Day 4 in the whispering jungle brought a new kind of hell. The heat had finally broken, replaced by a dense, suffocating humidity that clung to the skin like wet wool. The canopy overhead grew so thick that the red sun of Xylos 9 was entirely choked out, plunging the jungle floor into a perpetual, bruised twilight. Cole walked point, his machete, a dull, heavy slab of issued carbon steel, swung in rhythmic, exhausting arcs. Hack, step, hack, step. Behind him, the aliens were struggling. The lack of proper nutrition was catching up to them. Vaughn, the massive Ursoid, was breathing in shallow, rattling gasps. The heavy gravity combined with an empty stomach was stripping the fat reserves from his bones at a terrifying rate. Gar was eerily quiet, his usually proud, upright posture slouching. Only Kale, the nimble tracker, seemed fully alert, his 4 eyes constantly scanning the shadows. "Hold," Kyle clicked, his voice sharp in the heavy air. Cole stopped, the machete resting against his shoulder. He wiped a mixture of sweat and grime from his forehead. "What is it?" "The wind," Kyle said, pointing a slender, trembling finger ahead of them. "It's carrying something." "Particulates." Cole squinted into the gloom. Down the slope of the valley they were entering, a low, creeping fog was rolling through the massive, twisted roots of the jungle trees. It wasn't gray or white, it was a shimmering, iridescent gold. It hung in the air like suspended dust, glowing faintly in the dim light. "Spores," Gar hissed, his slit pupils dilating. Kyle pulled out his military-issue scanner. The device whirred, struggling to process the dense organic material. When the reading finally stabilized, Kale's skin paled to an ashen gray. "Class A neurodepressant," Kyle stammered, backing up a step. "It's a defensive mechanism of the somnus fungi down in that basin. The spores bind to the central nervous system. They block the transmission of bioelectrical signals. It's designed to shut down motor functions, then the autonomic systems. Heart, lungs." "So, we go around," Cole said, turning to look at the sheer, jagged cliffs that bordered the valley on both sides. "We can't," Vaughn rumbled miserably. "The cliffs are too steep, and my legs, I cannot climb." "If we breathe it, we sleep," Kyle warned. "If we sleep, we die. The scavengers in this biome hunt by following the spore clouds, waiting for prey to drop." Cole looked at the golden fog. It was beautiful, in a deceptive, lethal way. He looked back at his squad. They were battered, starving, and terrified. If they stayed here, they'd starve. If they tried to climb, Vaughn would fall. "Cover your mouths," Cole ordered. He tore a strip of cloth from the hem of his already ruined shirt and tied it tightly around his nose and mouth. Gar let out a low, vibrating growl. "A piece of fabric will not stop a microscopic neurobinder, human." "It'll stop the big clumps," Cole said. "We push through, fast as we can. Let's move." They descended into the basin. The moment they hit the golden fog, the air changed. It tasted sweet, like overripe fruit and copper. The spores clung to their skin, melting into their sweat. 5 minutes in, Vaughn fell. It wasn't a trip. His massive legs simply stopped receiving the signal to move. He crashed into the underbrush, a mountain of fur and muscle paralyzed in an instant. "Vaughn!" Gar roared, rushing to his side. The Saurian grabbed the Ursoid's heavy harness, straining to lift him. But as Gar pulled, his own arms gave out. His claws went slack. He dropped to his knees, his eyes wide with rising panic. My limbs. They are cold." Kyle didn't even make it that far. The tracker had simply folded onto the ground 50 yards back, deeply unconscious. Cole stopped. He turned around. He felt it. The spores were in his lungs, entering his bloodstream, crossing the blood-brain barrier. In a Saurian or an Ursoid, the neurobinder acted as a total system override, but the human brain is a bizarre, heavily fortified chemical factory. When the foreign depressant flooded Cole's synapses, his body didn't shut down. It identified a massive, localized threat to his nervous system. It panicked. And when a human body panics, it opens the floodgates. Cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine, adrenaline. Cole's heart rate spiked to 160 beats per minute. His pupils dilated until his eyes were almost entirely black. A violent electric shudder racked his spine. To the alien spores trying to put him to sleep, the human endocrine system had just dropped a chemical nuclear bomb. Cole ripped the cloth from his mouth. He didn't feel sleepy. He felt like he had just dry swallowed a handful of amphetamines. His hands shook, vibrating with a sudden, overwhelming surge of kinetic energy. "Gar!" Cole snapped, his voice tight, moving faster than he had in days. He grabbed the Saurian by the webbing of his gear. "Get up!" "I cannot!" Gar slurred, his eyelids drooping. "Leave me. The rules of the hunt." "Screw the rules," Cole growled, his jaw clenching. A sound interrupted him. It was a wet, heavy clicking, coming from the dense brush just beyond the edge of the clearing. The golden fog parted, disturbed by something massive moving low to the ground. Cole dropped Gar's harness. He gripped his machete with both hands. It crawled out of the shadows. A trench stalker. It was the size of a grizzly bear, but built like a centipede, covered in interlocking plates of matte black chitin. Dozens of bladed legs dug into the soil. Its head was a featureless dome, save for a massive set of horizontal mandibles dripping with a corrosive enzyme. It had smelled the sleeping prey. It had come to feed. Up in orbit, the commandant leaned forward in his command chair, his mandibles twitching as he watched the drone feed. "The human is fully exposed to the somnus spores," the comms officer noted, confused. "Why isn't he paralyzed?" "Because he is a freak of nature," the commandant whispered. "Look at his telemetry. His biological engine is tearing itself apart to keep him awake. It is a death sentence. The stalker will finish him." Down in the basin, the stalker lunged. It moved with terrifying speed, a blur of black armor and clicking legs, aiming straight for the paralyzed Ursoid. Cole intercepted. He didn't think. Thought was too slow. The adrenaline stripped away the higher reasoning, leaving only the ancient, violent primate beneath. Cole stepped into the creature's path and swung the machete like a baseball bat. The heavy carbon steel blade slammed into the side of the stalker's armored head. The impact sent a shockwave up Cole's arms, nearly dislocating his shoulders. The blade didn't cut the chitin, but the sheer, blunt force trauma cracked the plating. The beast shrieked, a high, mechanical sound, and recoiled, its attention snapping away from Vaughn and onto the tiny, soft-skinned biped that had just struck it. It reared up, exposing its pale, unprotected underbelly, and drove two scythe-like forelegs down at Cole. Cole dove. The blades sheared through the air where his head had been, burying themselves deep into the soil. Cole rolled, the jagged roots tearing his uniform and scraping his skin. He sprang back to his feet with a speed that defied the crushing gravity of Xylos 9. The stalker ripped its claws from the dirt and whipped its massive body around. Its mandibles snapped shut, catching Cole's left forearm. Cole screamed. The serrated edges bit deep into his flesh, slicing through muscle and scraping against bone. The stalker jerked its head, lifting Cole off the ground, intending to rip the limb entirely off. Pain exploded in Cole's brain, bright and blinding. But humans do not submit to pain. Under the influence of severe trauma, their biology weaponizes it. Endorphins flooded his system, a natural opiate that dampened the agony just enough to leave the rage. Cole didn't pull away. He didn't try to free his trapped arm. Instead, he pulled himself closer. Using his trapped left arm as a gruesome anchor, Cole hauled his body weight upward. He brought his right hand down in a brutal, desperate arc, driving the point of the machete straight down into the narrow, unarmored gap between the stalker's head and its thorax. He didn't just stab it. He drove his entire body weight onto the hilt. The blade buried itself to the handle. A geyser of foul, yellow ichor erupted from the wound. The stalker thrashed violently, screaming its mechanical shriek. Its mandibles spasmed and released Cole's arm. The beast staggered backward, its dozens of legs kicking aimlessly as its central nervous system was severed. It crashed into the underbrush, convulsed for 10 seconds, and lay still. Cole hit the dirt. He rolled onto his back, his chest heaving, gasping for the spore-choked air. His left arm was a ruined, bloody mess. He looked over at Gar. The Saurian was paralyzed, but his eyes were wide open. He had seen the whole thing. Cole let out a ragged, breathless laugh, the adrenaline still humming violently in his veins. "Well," Cole wheezed, his vision swimming, "that woke me up." It took 3 hours for the wind to shift and blow the golden fog out of the basin. As the neurodepressant slowly flushed from their systems, the alien recruits began to regain motor function. Kyle was the first to sit up, groaning as a severe chemical hangover pounded against his temples. He looked around the dim clearing, his 4 eyes adjusting to the shadows. He saw Vaughn slowly pushing himself onto his massive paws, shaking his heavy head. He saw Gar leaning against a tree, his scales pale. And then he saw Cole. The human was sitting on the severed, ruined carapace of the trench stalker. A fire had been built a few yards away, crackling cheerfully in the humid air. But it was the smell that caught Kyle's attention first. Copper. Heavy, raw iron. Kyle's gaze dropped to Cole's arm. It was drenched in a vibrant, terrifying crimson liquid. Blood. A horrifying amount of it. It was pooling on the stalker's black shell, dripping steadily into the dirt. "By the stars!" Kyle gasped, scrambling backward. "Cole, you are leaking!" Vaughn and Gar snapped their heads around. When they saw the sheer volume of blood painting the human side, both veterans of a dozen brutal worlds recoiled. To most galactic species, a circulatory system was a highly pressurized, closed loop of nutrient-rich sludge. If you sprung a leak of that magnitude, you died within minutes. The hydraulic pressure simply failed. "You have suffered a catastrophic breach," Gar said, his voice dropping to a horrified whisper. He pushed himself upright, stumbling toward the human. "Your primary vascular line is severed. You're going to die. We have no medical fabricators." Cole looked down at his arm. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a deep, throbbing ache that radiated into his jaw. "Relax," Cole muttered. "It missed the main artery. I'd be dead already if it hadn't. It's just a deep, venous bleed. Messy, but fixable." "Fixable!" Kyle shrieked, pulling his scanner. "You have lost over a pint of internal fluid. Your pressure is dropping." "Yeah, that happens when you get chewed on," Cole said dryly. He reached into his surviving cargo pocket and pulled out a small, unassuming plastic tube. It was a tube of industrial-grade cyanoacrylate, superglue. Not standard issue, but something Cole had smuggled in his boot. Cole clamped his right hand down hard on his left bicep, applying manual pressure to slow the bleeding. He waited 30 seconds, watching the flow turn sluggish. "Watch closely, boys," Cole grunted. "Biology lesson." With his teeth, he uncapped the glue. He took a deep breath, knowing this was going to hurt more than the bite itself. He squeezed the wound's edges together with his fingers and ran a thick bead of the chemical adhesive directly into the open laceration. The glue reacted immediately with the moisture of the blood, generating a burst of intense, localized heat. The chemical burned, stinging like a swarm of hornets. Cole's jaw locked tight. A single vein pulsed angrily on his forehead. "What are you doing?" Vaughn bellowed, horrified. "You are introducing toxic synthetic polymers directly into your bloodstream." "Cauterizing the small vessels," Cole managed to grit out, "and binding the dermal layers." He held the skin together tightly for 60 seconds. When he pulled his hand away, the bleeding had stopped. The wound was sealed shut by a thick, ugly ridge of hardened, bloody plastic. Next, Cole grabbed a relatively clean piece of his torn shirt. He wrapped it tightly around the glued wound, tying it off with his teeth and his right hand to form a pressure dressing. He let out a long, exhausted breath, slumping back against the stalker's shell. The alien stood in absolute, stunned silence. Your body," Kyle whispered, his scanner dropping to his side. "It is not going into shock." "How? How does a creature sustain a physical trauma that severe, lose that much fluid, and simply glue itself shut?" "Humans have high blood pressure," Cole explained, his voice tired but steady. "We bleed fast, but we clot fast, too. The platelets in the blood hit the air and they turn into a net. It forms a plug, turns our own fluids into concrete. Eventually the body eats the glue, breaks it down, and replaces it with scar tissue. Tougher skin." Gar stared at the crude, bloody bandage on Cole's arm. He looked at the massive, slaughtered apex predator beneath the human. "You turn your own injuries into armor," Gar said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "Something like that," Cole nodded, taking a pull from his canteen. Vaughn stepped forward, his massive ursoid face contorted in a mixture of awe and deep, profound confusion. "Cole," Vaughn rumbled gently, "what kind of world do you come from? The Commandant called Earth a Class 3 paradise. He said you require soft beds and purified water." Cole barked a short, bitter laugh. "Earth is a Class 3 world, Vaughn, if you look at it from orbit. Sure, we have oceans, we have temperate zones. The gravity isn't crushing." Cole leaned forward, resting his good arm on his knee. The flickering light of the fire danced across his dirt-streaked face. "But the Commandant doesn't know shit about Earth," Cole continued, his voice dropping low, serious. "Earth isn't a death world because of the gravity, or the weather, or the apex predators. We killed all the apex predators thousands of years ago. Earth is a death world because of us." The aliens listened, completely captivated by the weary, broken creature sitting before them. "Our planet is a crucible of chaos," Cole said. "Microorganisms that mutate every season just to kill us. Flora that produces lethal toxins that we decided to use as seasoning. Tectonic plates that randomly decide to swallow cities whole. We didn't evolve by being the strongest, or the fastest, or the most armored." Cole tapped the bloody bandage on his arm. "We evolved by being the hardest things to kill," Cole said softly. "We survive trauma. We adapt to poison. We take the worst the universe can throw at us. We bleed a little. We scar over. And we keep walking." Up in the orbital command center, the silence was absolute. The commandant stood before the massive holographic display. The telemetry data of the human recruit was scrolling across the screen. Tissue regeneration initiated. Heart rate returning to baseline. Endocrine levels stabilizing. The avian comms officer looked up, his feathers ruffled in unease. "Sir, he killed a shale gorgon with a blunt piece of metal, while under the effects of a Class A neurotoxin." The commandant didn't answer immediately. He stared at the image of the human, sitting by the fire, calmly drinking water after performing localized field surgery on himself. "We designed this training program to break apex predators," the commandant finally said, his voice devoid of its usual arrogance. It was hollow, thoughtful. "To weed out the weak." "Yes, sir," the officer replied. "We were wrong," the commandant whispered, his mandibles clicking softly. "He is not prey." The commandant reached out and touched the holographic display, right where Cole's exhausted, soot-stained face hovered. "He is the catastrophe that apex predators run from." Day 7 broke not with sunlight, but with a bruised, suffocating darkness. The atmospheric pressure plummeted so rapidly it made Cole's ears ring. The heavy, stagnant humidity of the whispering jungle vanished, sucked up into a swirling vortex of slate-gray clouds that blanketed the sky. Kyle looked at his datapad. The screen was flickering, struggling against the sudden spike in electromagnetic interference. "Thermal inversion," Kyle clicked nervously, his 4 eyes wide. "A massive one. The upper atmosphere is collapsing into the equatorial trough. The rain..." Before the tracker could finish, the first drop hit Vaughn's shoulder. It hissed. A tiny wisp of white smoke curled up from the Ursoid's thick fur. Vaughn flinched, swatting at the spot with a massive paw. "Acid!" Gar growled, looking up at the churning sky. "pH level is dropping," Kyle confirmed, panic rising in his voice. "It's a localized caustic deluge. If we stay out in the open, it will eat through our armor plating. It will dissolve our flesh." Cole didn't look up. He looked at the topographic map on his wrist comp. The extraction beacon was 3 miles away. It sat at the peak of a basalt ridge, completely exposed. "Then we don't stay in the open," Cole said. His voice was ragged, his throat raw from days of drinking poorly filtered river water. "Under the canopy. We use the broadleaf ferns as umbrellas. Move." They walked. It wasn't a tactical march anymore. It was a death march. The rain intensified, falling in heavy, stinging sheets. The jungle canopy caught most of it, but the droplets that bled through hit like lit matches. Cole's left arm throbbed with a sickening rhythm. The superglue was holding, but the skin around the wound was angry, swollen, and radiating heat. Every step in the 1.4G environment sent a shockwave of pain up his spine. But he kept the pace. Left foot, right foot. Behind him, the hierarchy of the squad had entirely inverted. Gar, the massive Saurian warrior who had once mocked him, now stepped precisely where Cole stepped. Vaughn followed Gar. Kyle took the rear. They no longer trusted their own Deathworld instincts. They trusted the human. Mile 1 passed in agonizing silence, save for the hissing of acid rain against the foliage. Mile 2 brought the mud. The caustic rain was melting the topsoil, turning the jungle floor into a slick, knee-deep swamp of chemical sludge. It pulled at their boots with every step, demanding twice the caloric output to move half the distance. Vaughn stumbled. The Ursoid went down on one knee, his massive chest heaving. The acid mud splashed against his exposed snout, and he let out a low, pained groan. "I cannot," Vaughn rumbled, his voice devoid of hope. "My core temperature is failing. The mud. It is too heavy." Gar stopped. He looked back at Vaughn, then forward to the ridge that loomed in the distance, partially obscured by the caustic downpour. The saurian scales were pitted and smoking where the rain had hit them. "Leave him," Gar said, his voice flat, defeated. "The strong survive. The weak fall. That is the law of the deep." Cole stopped. He turned around. The human looked terrible. His uniform was in tatters. His face was a mask of grime, dried blood, and exhaustion. But his eyes were a terrifying, icy blue, burning through the grey gloom of the storm. Cole walked back through the sucking mud. He didn't say a word to Gar. He stopped in front of Vaughn. Cole bent down. He grabbed the heavy webbing of Vaughn's combat harness with his good right hand. He locked his knees, gritted his teeth, and pulled. It was a ridiculous sight. A soft-skinned biped trying to haul a creature that weighed a ton out of the mud. The math didn't work. The biology didn't work. But Cole didn't care about the math. A primal, guttural roar ripped from his throat. The muscles in his back coiled like steel cables. Vaughn felt the violent, desperate tension. The sheer, irrational defiance of the human acted like a jolt of electricity to the Ursoid's fading nervous system. Ashamed to be outdone by a creature a fraction of his size, Vaughn roared back. The Ursoid dug his massive claws into the mud and heaved. Together they broke the suction. Vaughn staggered to his feet, panting heavily. Cole let go of the harness. He didn't pat Vaughn on the back. He didn't offer a word of encouragement. He just turned his icy glare onto Gar. "On Earth, the strong carry the weak," Cole rasped, his voice cutting through the hiss of the rain. "Because tomorrow, the strong might break, and they'll need someone to carry them. Now pick up your feet." Gar lowered his head, exposing his neck in a deep, instinctual gesture of submission. They reached the base of the extraction ridge at mile 3. The canopy ended here. The ridge was a sheer slope of slick, black basalt. The extraction beacon sat at the top, a pulsing red light in the storm. Between them and the top was 100 yards of completely exposed rock, currently being pounded by a torrential waterfall of acid rain. There was no cover. "It will strip the flesh from our bones before we reach the midpoint," Cale shouted over the roar of the storm. Cole looked at the slope. He looked at his ruined, bloody left arm. The cyanoacrylate was beginning to crack at the edges. If he pushed it too hard, the wound would blow open, and he'd bleed out in minutes. He unclipped the heavy carbon steel machete from his belt. "Single file," Cole yelled. "Lock onto the harness of the man in front of you. Do not let go. I break the wind. I break the rain. You just push me forward." "Cole, your arm," Vaughn warned. "It's not my arm right now," Cole said coldly. "It's a climbing hook. Lock in." Gar stepped up behind Cole, grabbing the human's belt. Vaughn locked onto Gar. Cale locked onto Vaughn. Cole stepped out from beneath the canopy. The acid rain hit him like a swarm of angry wasps. The pain was immediate and blinding. It seared his skin, biting through his soaked clothes. He didn't scream. He swung the machete. The heavy blade bit into the basalt, chipping away a tiny ledge. Cole jammed his boot into the crack. He reached up with his ruined left arm, wedging his fingers into a natural fissure in the rock. The pressure on his glued wound was agonizing. He felt a warm, wet trickle beneath the bandage. The seal was failing. "Push!" Cole roared. Gar shoved forward. Cole hauled himself up one step. He swung the machete again. Crack, step, pull. They became a single, desperate organism, inching up the slick, burning rock. The acid ate at them. The heavy gravity dragged at them. Halfway up, Cole's grip slipped. His boots lost purchase on the wet basalt. He slid backward. The entire chain jerked, threatening to pull all four of them down into the mud below. Gar roared, his heavily armored claws digging frantically into the rock, holding the human's weight. "I have you!" Gar bellowed. "Climb!" Cole didn't look down. He raised the machete and slammed it into the rock again. 70 yards, 80, 90. At the crest of the ridge, the massive, blocky shape of the extraction dropship sat idling, its heavy repulsor engines fighting the storm. The ramp was lowered, floodlights cutting through the driving rain. Standing on the ramp, untouched by the storm in his heavy environmental armor, was the commandant. Cole breached the crest. He threw himself over the edge of the ridge, dragging Gar up with him. Gar hauled Vaughn. Vaughn pulled Cale. They collapsed onto the hard, metal grating of the landing pad, a tangled mass of smoking scales, burned fur, and bleeding flesh. The extraction team rushed out, medical fabricators whirring, immediately descending upon the aliens. A medic drone hovered over Cole. The human swatted it away with his right hand. Cole didn't stay on the ground. His legs shook violently. His muscles were twitching, starved of potassium and flooded with lactic acid. His left arm was soaked in fresh blood. But he put his hands on his knees, locked his joints, and forced himself to stand. He stood in the driving acid rain, looking up the ramp at the commandant. He didn't speak. He just waited. The storm raged outside the reinforced hull of the dropship as it broke atmosphere, leaving the hellscape of Xylos 9 behind. Inside the medical bay, the air was warm, sterile, and heavily oxygenated. The silence was absolute, save for the rhythmic beeping of the biomonitors. Cole sat on the edge of a biobed. A medical drone had stripped away his ruined shirt, cleaned the acid burns on his torso, and properly sutured the massive gash on his left arm. The wound was now sealed beneath a thick layer of synthetic dermal plast. He was drinking from a small pouch of synthesized water. It tasted like nothing. It tasted incredible. The door to the med bay hissed open. The commandant stepped in. The towering alien had removed his environmental helmet. His compound eyes were unreadable as he looked at the human. Gar, Vaughn, and Cale were in the adjacent recovery bays. As the commandant entered, they tried to sit up, a reflex of military discipline. "Rest," the commandant ordered, his voice lacking its usual grating edge. He walked past them and stopped in front of Cole. Cole didn't stand. He took another sip of water, his eyes meeting the alien instructors. "Your biometric data is a complete paradox," the commandant said quietly. "You sustained lethal levels of neurotoxins. You inhaled a Class A depressant. You suffered a catastrophic vascular breach. You were exposed to concentrated atmospheric acid. By all known medical science in the Coalition, you died 4 days ago." "I'm stubborn," Cole said flatly. The commandant's mandibles clicked slowly. It wasn't a sound of annoyance. It was a sound of deep, analytical thought. "I called your world a Class 3 paradise," the commandant said. "I called you soft skin. I believed your species was a bureaucratic error, a weak link in the Coalition military apparatus." The commandant reached into a pouch on his tactical belt. He pulled out a small, heavy piece of dark metal. It was shaped like the jagged horizon of Xylos 9. The Deathworld certification insignia. "I was wrong," the commandant said. He didn't hand the pin to Cole. He reached out and drove the heavy pins directly into the collar of Cole's fresh uniform jacket, which hung over the end of the bed. "Your species does not possess the armored hide of a Krell. You lack the raw strength of an Ursoid or the speed of a Saurian," the commandant continued, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "But you possess something far more dangerous. You possess the absolute, terrifying refusal to die." The commandant looked at the heavily bandaged arm and then at Cole's face. "You weaponize trauma," the commandant whispered. "You consume poison for pleasure. You look at a death world, and you do not see a threat. You see a challenge." Cole crushed the empty water pouch in his hand. He looked past the commandant, toward his squad. Gar was watching him. The massive Saurian slowly brought his right fist up, tapping it twice against his own chest plate. It was the Saurian salute of the Blood Brother. A gesture reserved only for those they trusted with their lives in the darkest hunts. Vaughn nodded his heavy head. Kyle blinked his 4 eyes in silent reverence. Cole looked back at the commandant. "Did I pass, sir?" Cole asked, his voice steady. The commandant stood up to his full, towering height. He snapped a crisp, perfectly executed military salute. "You did not just pass, Specialist Cole," the commandant said. "You redefined the standard. The Coalition Command will be receiving my report immediately. They need to know that Earth is not a Class 3 world." "What is it then?" Cole asked, raising an eyebrow. "It is a Class 12 containment zone," the commandant said, completely deadpan. "And we are very, very fortunate that you are on our side." The commandant turned on his heel and marched out of the med bay, the doors hissing shut behind him. The silence returned, heavy and peaceful. Cole looked down at the dark metal pin on his jacket collar. He reached up, rubbing the back of his neck, feeling the exhaustion finally creeping past the fading adrenaline. "Cole," Vaughn's deep voice rumbled from across the room. "When we return to the central hub, what is the first thing you will do?" Cole laid back on the bio bed, staring up at the sterile white ceiling. He thought about the twitching purple meat, the bitter roots, the neurotoxic blister fruit, and the burning mud. He let out a long, slow breath, a genuine smile finally breaking across his scarred face. "I'm gonna find a place that serves a decent steak," Cole said, his eyes sliding shut. "And a whole lot of hot sauce." If you enjoyed seeing Cole turn a death world into his own personal proving ground, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Humans might not have armor or claws, but our absolute refusal to quit makes us the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. Share this video with a friend who loves HFY stories and sound off in the comments. What's the first meal you'd want after surviving Xylos 9? Keep your hot sauce handy, stay stubborn, and I'll see you in the next act of the sci-fi verse.